Good day, folks. Let's call this recording another discussion about fascism. But today we want to do something a little bit different. Let's engage in some mental gymnastics in this recording. In this session, let's make a link between Nietzsche, the famous German philosopher. Let's also link Nietzsche to the fascist ideology as proposed by Hitler and the Nazi regime. And then let's add a correction by Bob Marley in his 1978 recording, Rastaman Live Up, Rastaman Live Up. Now, I can hear you saying it. What? Dr. Lee, are you about to link Bob Marley, perhaps the greatest musician of the 20th century, to one of the most destructive ideologies of the 20th century? No, Dr. Lee, say it's not true. You are not getting ready to link Bob Marley to Hitler and Mussolini. Let's see what happens. Stay tuned. All right, let's begin. Okay. So let's recall in Friedrich Nietzsche's writings, in 1882, he tells us something quite a bit interesting. Let's recall that Nietzsche's writings on the Ubermonk, or the Overman, or the Superman, that these writings were translated by the National Socialists into the notions of Aryan supremacy. But the question remains, is this what Nietzsche was talking about? Look at Hitler glaring lovingly at a bust of Nietzsche. And can you just see it in Hitler's eyes, right? He's saying, teach us, please, teach us about the Overman. Tell us why the Aryans were so supreme. Well, is this what Nietzsche was talking about? When we see Nietzsche talk about the supremacy of the Overman, is he talking about the racial supremacy of the Aryans? All right, well, let's think about it, right? Let's look at Nietzsche's writing in 1882. In 1882, Friedrich Nietzsche tells us, and we quote, God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. Nietzsche asked, how shall we, murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death underneath our knives. This is a famous quote, Nietzsche telling us that God is dead and we have killed him. So let's interpret for a bit. For Nietzsche, without God, there is no authority for the moral values that are supposed to underpin society. So if you are free from God, then that means that you as a human being, that you are the master of your own fate. Now, this could be either a good thing or this could be a bad thing, because liberation can come with a price. The liberation is either a condemnation or it is freedom. But this liberation comes with a price. This brings with it a vacuum of meaning. For why do people exist if there is no more God? If God is dead, are you free from sin? Or are you condemned because your lifestyle has killed the conceptions of God? So where Nietzsche tells us that God is dead, we see that without the structure of religion, a person, a human being, is free to create yourself anew. And if you are free to create yourself, who will you become? What will you become? Now, let's put some sound effects on it. Let's go to the composer Strauss. And I'm going to put a little bit of sound effects on it for you. Try to be a little interesting in the recording. Let's see if it works. And then let's use Strauss's recording to be a backdrop for us. And let's go ahead and read some Nietzsche. The year 1885. The book is called Thus Spoke Zarathustra. I teach you the overman. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? We are quoting Nietzsche. All beings so far have created something beyond themselves. And do you want to be the ebb of this great flood and even go back to the beast rather than overcome man? What is the ape to man? A laughing stock or a painful embarrassment? And man shall be just that for the overman, a laughing stock or a painful embarrassment. Behold, I teach you the overman. The overman is the meaning of the earth. Let your will say, the overman shall be the meaning of the earth. I beseech you, my brothers, remain faithful to the earth and do not believe those who speak to you of other worldly hopes. Poison mixers are they, whether they know it or not. Despisers of life are they, decaying and poisoned themselves, of whom the earth is weary. So let them go. I'm reading to you an extended quote from Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra, 1885. Let's continue. Once the sin against God was the greatest sin, but God died, and these sinners died with him. To sin against the earth is now the most dreadful thing, and to esteem the entrails of the unknowable higher than the meaning of the earth. Wrap your mind around this. Nietzsche says, well, Thus Spoke Zarathustra says, what is the greatest experience you can have? It is the hour of the great contempt, that hour when your happiness too arouses your disgust, and even when your reason and your virtue arouses your disgust, the hour when you say, what matters my happiness? It is poverty and filth and wretched contentment, but my happiness ought to justify experience itself. The hour when you say, what matters my reason? Does it crave knowledge as the lion does his food? Remember that lion quote when we talk about Marley in a minute. It is, my reason is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. The hour when you say, what matters my virtue? As yet it has not, my virtue has not made me rage. How weary I am of my good and my evil, all that is poverty and filth and wretched contentment. Here is the kicker point to Thus Spoke Zarathustra for me. And this is the point that's going to be on the test. Nietzsche says, man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end. What can be loved in man is that he is an overture. He is an overture and a going under. So, one interpretation, my interpretation of this piece of Nietzsche here is that he says when Nietzsche uses the phrase the overman or the overmonk, he is not talking about anything that can be constructed or misconstrued into Aryan supremacy. What Nietzsche is saying to us is that the state of being a human, the state of being, which is being a human, is a link between that which you were before, a beast, and then that which you can become, a superior being, someone that is superior to what it means to be a human. That man is a rope, that to be a human being is a going over into a higher form of existence. I wonder if you can tell how much I appreciate that Thus Spoke Zarathustra quote. Now, let's keep on going and work our way to an understanding of Nietzsche, right? So what Nietzsche is doing here is he is reacting to the dominant German intellectual tradition of focusing on the hero figure that suffers, and through that suffering, that hero figure transforms himself into a better person, a more transcendent person. For Nietzsche, this is a lie. Nietzsche disagrees with this. For Nietzsche, it is not suffering that transforms a person, but it is falling into the, let's say, the more decadent pleasures of life that, and you overcoming your need for those pleasures, that is the thing that transforms you. So for Nietzsche, it's not Apollo, but it is Dionysus that offers the answer. The individual loses himself into the collective. And for this work, the group experience, in the group experience, one finds an ecstatic, transformational experience. Tragedy and suffering then becomes joined by ecstasy and revelry. And it is this ecstasy and revelry that merges in a dialectical form with tragedy and suffering. This is the thing that characterizes the human condition. An able person is going to be able to use the suffering and the ecstasy and transform oneself into a clear affirmation of life. Remember with me, it is Frankie Beverly that said, joy and pain merges rather the sunshine and the rain, joy and pain, right? Remember Frederick Douglass, we covered Frederick Douglass earlier. Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Frankie Beverly says joy and pain. Frederick Douglass, those who profess to favor freedom and yet depreciate rather agitation, these are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without the thunder and the lightning. So let's merge our Frederick Douglass on top of our Frankie Beverly, and then we'll lather on some some Nietzsche, right? So for Nietzsche, it's not a heavenly existence or a paradise that happens after you die, but the paradise, the heavenly existence. This is something that happens right here, right now, in a dialectical fashion, when you allow your tragedy and your suffering to be joined by ecstasy and revelry. The collective experience then allows one to elevate oneself into a new person, into a better person. And through that elevation, you prove the quality and the worth and the goodness of life. And once you do this, you can change your society. You can elevate yourself. You can, as Bob Marley says, you can lively up yourself, right? Now, let's work our way into some Bob Marley. Now, we're going to go into the fascist understanding of Nietzsche in a second, but let's look at what Bob Marley said. Let's compare this 1885 book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, into Bob Marley's 1978 recording, Rasta Man Live Up. Boom, 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 boom. Boom, boom, Rasta Man Live Up. In Nietzsche, 1885, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he tells us that pain is human and therefore pain is necessary. So your goal, if you're going to be a fully realized human being, you're going to accept pain. And in the acceptance of this pain and suffering, you will be able to live a more full and a more happy life. Well, Bob Marley tells us in 1978, he says, keep your culture. Don't be afraid of the vulture. Bob Marley said to grow your dreadlocks. Don't be afraid of the wolf pack, right? So that's, Bob Marley, Nietzsche. More in Nietzsche's 1885 book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he said you have to liberate yourself by understanding ideas without necessarily accepting them. So in so doing, you are able to live authentically without the doctrinaire control over the state and without the state controlling your thoughts. With your ability to think for yourself, you will transcend the state, then transcend what it means to be a human being, and then turn yourself into the overman or the superman. Well, Bob Marley says in the 1978 recording, Rasta Man Live Up, Congo Man Live Up, Bob Marley says, trotting through creation in an eyrie meditation, seen many visions in a disarmageddon, right? Bob Marley says, Rasta Man Live Up. You'll be liberating yourself. Again, back to Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche. Nietzsche tells us that we should become courageous. Remember in the quote we just read, he said you want to become like the lion and pursue spiritual growth, thereby breaking the strings of control over the state. You have to be courageous. Well, in 1978, Bob Marley says David slew Goliath with a sling and a stone. Marley reminds us that Samson slew the Philistines with a donkey jawbone, right? One last time, Nietzsche tells us that to learn to love life is to live as the child, is to be carefree. Again, is to resist the encroachments of the state and to play and to sing and to dance and to love. Well, Bob Marley tells us the chorus of the song is that the Rastaman, you should live up. He says, Bingy man, don't give up. The Congo man, you have to live up. The Bongo man, you cannot give up. You have to live your life, and the affirmation of the very humanity that gives justification to your existence. Okay, so now let's tie it all back to how the fascists use Friedrich Nietzsche. Not the overman as in becoming a superior form of humanity, but the fascist here says that the overman, or rather the Aryan is the overman, that the superman are those of Aryan blood, blonde hair, blue eyes, pale skin. And this supposed superman, the Aryan, is so superior because dialectically everyone else is inferior. Now, along with his supposed superiority, the fascists, we're talking about Adolf Hitler, the National Socialists, and the Nazi Party, the fascist believes that the Aryan is aggrieved on earth, has been subjugated by the march of history, and the Aryan has to then strive for global power. How do you do that? You have to create the homeland, the Heimat. You have to protect this homeland. How do you create this homeland? You have to take this land back from other places. Hence the invasion of Poland, right? How does the Aryan protect their global supremacy? Well, you have to birth more Aryans. You have to make sure then you have to target the way the birth rate occurs in the country, thereby using a form of eugenics that was pioneered by the Americans in the context of Jim Crow, United States. You have to birth more Aryans, and then you also have to subjugate, put non-Aryans in concentration camps and subject them to extermination through work, literally to kill them. And so for the fascists, they would use Nietzsche's effort to becoming the Superman. For the fascists, they say pain and suffering in the service of the state, that this is a positive thing. Remember with me again, you're Mussolini. I'm not Mussolini. You're Machiavelli. Remember with me, you're Machiavelli, where Machiavelli said that the state is not using love because people can choose who they want to love. The state is not using hatred because hatred is something that can overcome the state eventually. Instead, for Machiavelli, the state has to inspire fear. And how does the state inspire fear? The state uses suffering, right? And so the fascist says that pain and suffering in the service of the state is ultimately a positive thing because it creates a stronger state. Aryans have a responsibility to their, global history to be strong people. And so weak people have to be killed off. This Aryan bloodline becomes stronger. They create a stronger state. They are better able to secure their homeland, and thus they should be able to essentially take over the world. Untold suffering. Hitler then becomes one of the most hated people in human history. All right, so that was a discussion of Friedrich Nietzsche, how the fascists use Friedrich Nietzsche, and then I wanted to add a Bob Marley style correction. More later. Thank you for listening.